Well, hello there. I've got a script that I'm reading from, so just to keep myself on track. Anyway, I must say I'm not a geologist, and I'm not an environmentalist, and I'm not anything to do with the climate change people. I'm just an ordinary geezer with an opinion, and this is my opinion that I'm going to express today. You can choose not to agree with me, or you can agree with me, but this is my opinion and what the conclusions that I've come up with. I'm just not convinced that reducing CO2 levels is a good idea. I just don't believe in global warming that we've been told about. And also, I don't support any of these action groups like Stop Oil or anything like that. I don't believe in any of that stuff. So let me give you a little bit of background about why I came up with this conclusion that reducing CO2 levels is a bad idea. A few years ago, I used to keep freshwater tropical fish, and I had a lovely 4-foot fish tank, which I used to keep plants and fish. Now, before I started to inject CO2 into the water, via a regulator, of course, with a monitor, the plants were struggling to survive. They just couldn't grow properly. Anyway, as soon as I started to inject CO2 into the water, the plant life just took off. It became, instead of it being stringy and emaciated looking plants, the plants that started to grow on after I started to inject the CO2 started to change colour. They started to become this vivid green colour. And on the underside of the leaves, you could see little tiny bubbles of oxygen forming. That's because the plants were taking the carbon dioxide from the water, and they were taking hydrogen from the water, and they were producing hydrocarbons, which is plant life. So not only were they taking the CO2 out of the water and obviously the hydrogen from the water to make carbohydrate, they're actually using the waste from the fish themselves into producing more plant. Well, the same thing is happening to our planet. Since the year 2000, there has been an 11% increase in CO2 levels. That doesn't mean that CO2 levels are at 11%. They just mean that they've increased by 11%. The current level of CO2 in the atmosphere is a measly 0.04%, which is not a lot. If you believe these so-called activists who say that CO2 is bad for the planet, I would suggest you think again, because since the year 2000, plant life on this planet has increased by equivalent size of the United States of America. That's an incredible amount of green land that suddenly appeared since the year 2000, and this 11% increase. In the year 2000, the CO2 levels were 0.03%. So in reality, the CO2 levels on the planet have increased by 0.01%, which is a tiny, tiny little bit. So with this increase of green areas on the planet, this means there's more food for the vegetarians. And there's also more food for cattle, sheep and pigs for our dinner table as well. Now, there's a few plants that we all like wheat, barley, hops, oats. They all go into producing beer. If you start reducing the CO2 levels in the atmosphere, plants start to die. And when plants start to die, there'll be no more Bud Light for you guys to drink. Yeah, just think on that for a bit. Well, I recently watched 2 climate experts talking about the CO2 levels, and they went on to say that we're currently in an ice age. This means that we've got ice at both poles, and that they claimed that the CO2 levels are currently lower than they should be. And we all know that seasonal changes are due to the tilt of the planet towards the sun and away from the sun, depending on which hemisphere you live in. But what they also told me was that these scientists said that the Earth is in a 11-year elliptical orbit around the sun, which means that at some point in that orbit we are closer to the sun than we are at other times. So that means that the Earth is going to be slightly warmer at some point in that orbit than other points in that orbit. So we can expect a long seasonal change of 11 years to happen. Remember the summer of 1976? That was a pretty hot summer then. And there was no talk of global warming then. It just seems to be a fashion that's occurring today. Now, I remember as a young child listening to the radio, and the experts on the radio were saying that we were currently entering into another ice age. Well, that's not happened, has it? So we've gone from global cooling to global warming. It's incredible, isn't it? In just a few short years, we've done a 360 in our approach, or a 180 in our approach to global environment. I'm not saying we should stop caring about the environment, and I'm not saying that we should suddenly start producing more CO2. But what I am saying is we should be careful of listening to autistic children who read from a script and who have rather good PR people. I am saying that we should stop polluting the planet by discarding our waste willy-nilly. Now, I can understand countries like China who have no refuse collection, so any rubbish that they collect, they just goes into the street. Now, I've seen this firsthand when I was in China. I've seen lakes and rivers covered in plastics, and I've seen drifts of food containers up to your shoulders deep in plastic containers for outside a food vendor. In this country, in England, we have refuge collection, so there's no excuse for discarding your rubbish where you like, in the streets, back alleys, country lanes, farmers' fields. I've seen it all. There's no excuse for that. I also work closely with scientists who are checking our food for plastics. And yes, there is plastics in the food chain. We're eating plastic because it's in the food. But what is the answer? What is the answer? I don't know what the answer is. But remember this. Plants need CO2, and if you reduce CO2 down to 0.002%, all plant life on this planet will die. That means there's no more food for vegetarians, no more food for vegans, and no more food for you and me. So just be careful what you wish for, because you may just get it. Okay, on that cheery note, I'll say goodbye.